And we are live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Civil Offense Podcast. My name is Ahmed Mlih, and today, well, it doesn't look like we need much of an introduction because we have the man himself, Jose Galison. Orale güey. No way, Jose. How's it going, man?
Good. I don't know what those words mean. I don't actually speak Spanish. It's an open secret. My name's made up. I don't care. People know,
Yeah.
but
No, I
it's
heard it
just a
on one of your
pseudonym.
shows I was listening to, and I'm like, no, I have to say it regardless. And that actually, I think you had like your Twitter profile. You had some sort of like a donkey and sombrero at one point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone made that as like a joke off of it. I've had a few different ones. I've had a few different Twitter accounts because I've gotten nuked a bunch of
Yeah.
times. But now I'm able to stick around on the new iteration of Twitter. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I've had a few goofy profile pics.
No, we were mutuals on that one. That was the first one that we followed each other on. So I saw that. I'm like, oh shit, a Mexican followed me. I was like, okay,
Yep.
well, it's cool. But
No, I'm just a
I
liar.
legit thought you were at the time. Just because, I thought you were going with the stereotype. I thought, the
Yeah.
donkey and everything.
No, it's actually the funny thing. The name was born out of like way before I had any podcast aspirations or anything. I had like just was like a memer on Facebook, and I fucking like I just got tired of arguing with my family about like politics or whatever, and like using my real name. And then also like it was during that time where they were cracking down on Facebook with censorship. So I was like, I didn't want to lose my main account that it was like has like family. I say that now like I had value in my Facebook, but because I never go on it now. But I was like, I didn't want to lose all family pictures and stuff like that, you know? So I was like, I'll just make an alt account. And then I just like made up an Hispanic name. And
Yeah.
that's just because I just thought it was funny to like give me a tiny bit of minority points. So, which like, I don't
Yeah.
care. So, especially if you know how I am on Twitter, it's like, I don't have no problem with being offensive. So it's like, if anything, I just thought it was funny that it like give me a tiny little shield. It'd be like, hey, I'm Hispanic. Like, well, I'm not. But like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, no, I made that as an alt, and then from then later when I started podcast, I'm like, whatever, it works as a name. I like it. I think it has a good ring to it. Kind of works the No Way Jose shtick for the show. So yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting where I met you because I mentioned this in the Twitter DMs when we were first talking, and it was after a conference I was hosting. I was helping out like Students for Liberty because I was doing like some like their local coordinator program thing, and like I had a team of people. We were doing like an anti-censorship summit. So we had Clint Russell, your buddy from Liberty Lockdown, cool guy, and he spoke at our thing, and also Josie, the redheaded libertarian, came as well. And so we went to like this restaurant or bar thing after, and I expected him to go because he said he was going, but I didn't expect you guys to be there. You and Top were actually there as well, and I was like, oh shit, it's like half of Tower Gang. I should probably introduce myself, not just say goodbye to Clint, but also talk to you guys. And I mentioned to you specifically, I was like, yeah, I like your Anarchist Handbook series because I remember that was like some of the first stuff I had gotten into when I was watching your content. Because I had like purchased the Anarchist Handbook, was reading it, and I think like the Sterner one specifically was one that I was reading it and I wasn't exactly getting everything he was talking about. Like I kind of was understanding it, but I was kind of confused as to like, does he literally mean he doesn't believe in morality and stuff like that? Like, is it literally a spook to him? But I remember watching your episode on that. I was on vacation or something, like coming back home. I think I was like sick from COVID, but it was all right because it was a good listen. It didn't really get interrupted by the sickness or anything. But yeah, I think it really cleared up a lot up. And then I was like listening to your other stuff, like your Hawk Die Anarchy intro and like so on and so forth. And I kind of got into it at that point. But yeah, like when I told you about it, you were like, yeah, you think Sterner is like very misunderstood or like people don't get what he's talking about. So yeah, what did you mean by that?
Oh, I don't know. We could go 1,000 different ways with that. But I would say, like you were saying with reading it, feel like even I read the entire Ego on its own, and I've only read it once through. I'm not like making any sort of claim to be an expert or whatever. But even then, like I still, like there's a lot of shit like the way he writes. You're like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Like, just the way he writes is just it's just bizarre. But I guess you maybe need a go like maybe I don't know, more specific. Is there something specifically? Because I think there's a lot of things people misconceive about it.
Yeah.
And probably the morality one would be
Yeah.
because I guess because this is going to offend people, but I'm not someone who believes in objective like morality. Because what is morality? Morality is just to me just a set of principles that people determine as like a preferable way to go about or whatever, and at the end of the day, it all comes down to subjectivity, in my opinion. Now, I have my opinions on what leads to a more prosperous life, so we can get into like Hoppe's argumentation ethics or something along those lines, like to what is the best way to interact with the world. And that's like that. Like it's almost like a logical way to approach your morality, essentially. Like what mode would I like to go about living about in life? To have a good life. And like, I guess then it gets to the subjective. What is a good life to you? For who knows? There might be some guy out there who's a serial killer. To him, what sounds like a good life is killing a bunch of people. And it's like, it's kind of subjective. To him, that is good. To us, the rest of it's not. And our egos outweigh his. And hopefully we stamp that out. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of ways to go with it. It's a very odd, it's not even how to explain like, egoism. It's almost more of like a way to think, I think, in a lot of ways, as opposed to like a lot of people try to make it like a political philosophy or something along those lines. I mean, at the end of the day, when you read Ego Its Own, I feel like everyone kind of gets a different takeaway somewhat, if they actually do. I think the majority of like online egoists probably actually haven't fucking read it. So they're just kind of like, ooh, morals are bad, I'm gonna steal things. And you're like, okay, whatever. That's kind of a stupid takeaway to get from all of that. I guess in a certain like semantic sense, yeah, morality is kind of meaningless, sort of. Is like, I guess if you're trying to say in a subjective way, but in the day we all live in this subjective world and want to have a good experience in it. So it just, I don't know, like laying down some sort of set of principles that people should operate their lives by, or at least like hey, this is probably the best way to get to. And I think that is essentially like the understanding of like private property and like kind of abiding by those sort of rights. So this is why like when it comes to like egoism, you could almost say it like undergirds other like philosophies. Because like I consider myself an egoist in some senses, but I'm also like an ANCAP and an agorist or whatever different label you want to use. Because a lot of people try to be like place that like only like on the left anarchy or whatever, and you're like, no, you can be pretty goddamn cultural conservative or whatever the fuck as an egoist. You don't have to have the weird like sensibilities a lot of the lefty egoist types have. If you do, whatever, more power to you. But I don't think it's like explicit to that. Which, I mean, that happens with a lot of philosophies. Like you look at like Hoppianism or Agorism, like Hoppians end up like attracting like a ton of like really stupid, low hanging like rightoids that are trying to be like, oh, fucking physical removal, like fucking kill the commies, and you're like, well, that's not really what he was actually advocating for when he talked about physical removal. And then there's a lot of that with agorism where it almost like attracts commies because it's like just kind of the flavor that it attracts. Because it has this idea people see as like left libertarianism. I'm kind of droning on there, so I don't know if you want to like hone me in.
We got the Fox saying N. Well, that's a good way to break it. But yeah, no, I mean, like what I'm getting from you, and this is something I came to as well, but it wasn't just reading Stirner. It was also reading like Rand's version of egoism, which I know like you at least have said on one stream that you see it as like preferable, like Stirner's version, or I guess superior in the sense that like it was more well thought out, if I'm getting you right on that.
Actually
but
makes fucking sense.
Well, I don't think like Rand's one is like incoherent or anything. I think like the thing with egoism, and at least with hers, it's more like influence from Aristotle, but it as a moral philosophy is more so like the idea that like you're a consequentialist. Like it's basically going from if I care about X, then I should do Y, or at least that would be most conducive to what I'd want. The thing with Rand is that she's like criticized Stirner for like her main criticism of his egoism being that like acting on a whim to her is irrational, and basically the idea that like you should actually probably like think about whether this is in your self-interest for real or not, whether this is something that will actually be conducive to a better life for you. And her idea of that, I mean, like it can get a bit tricky because then you could go, okay, well, her version of it is just kind of like, her understanding of what a good life is and so on. But I think there are some ways in which you could say, okay, maybe there's like a standard, like in the sense that like, if you value life, you definitely don't want to kill yourself, or you don't want to get extremely risky unnecessarily in certain ways. So, I mean, there's that. I would also say like, when Stirner sees morality as a spook, I think it's kind of odd because like I differentiate ethics and morals, but it seems like Stirner just puts it all together and says like, you know what, it's all fake, right? Morality, I would agree, is subjective just because, value is subjective. So what you want to do with your life is not the same as what somebody else wants to do with their life. Though I would say in the ethical sense, I would believe that, or I would be able to argue that libertarianism is true, on a logical level. So I would say like ethically speaking, there are certain things, not that you're, unable to do, but maybe that would be an ethical violation.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I actually that critique of Stirner from Rand I would except for the fact that I don't even know. I mean, maybe he did say something along those lines implying that it was do your whims. I feel like that you could I feel like that's almost like a subjective characterization. You could probably do the same thing with Rand's, her objectivism or whatever. You could probably say, oh, we shouldn't just follow our whims, which then she would say, oh, we wouldn't. I don't know. Stirner's not alive today, so maybe that
Right.
might have been a false characterization of it. That's not how the takeaway I got. I didn't at all think like, oh, whatever, we should just follow our id. Like, cause like, I mean, maybe I'm getting a little bit semantic, but like, what the id, like, just like kind of your primal, whatever you feel good do type thing. Um, I mean, I guess I didn't see that as him saying that at all. I just more like, like kind of be selfish. The same concept in a lot of ways I thought Randall was saying with her
Hmm.
objectivism, but I just feel like she kind of like, I don't know. To be fair, I've only read a few of Rand's books, and those were one of, like my early intro libertarian stuff, so I've forgotten a ton of it. But the vibe I get is it gets very convoluted as you get further along. Whereas like Stirner's is more broad and open to interpretation in the way you want to apply it. So I don't know. I guess maybe it's less restricted by that for somebody to be able to say like that's plain wrong because there's so many different ways you can interpret it. And like I said, I think egoism is just kind of a way to think. And the same thing I guess
Hmm.
probably could be said about objectivism for sure. But I don't know. I just remember when I got a little bit more into it, it just kind of got convoluted in what they're explaining. Whereas Sterner's pretty simple. It's like, hey, at the end of the day, like follow your ego. And like, obviously you're going to, as you go through life, realize like, hey, if I perform X action, this leads to Y result or whatever. And it's like, and I know that sounds like a really contractual way to go about life, but I feel like in a certain sense, people do it without even realizing. It's like a subconscious thing. Like when you're polite to people, like I do it because it makes me feel good, but it is a positive feedback. It's like a chicken egg thing. At some point in my life, when I was a small child, I was probably congratulated for being polite, or I just realized that when I was polite to people, things tend to go more my way. So it's like
Yeah.
this, like I guess it's hard to say which comes first. But the other day, that's kind of sort of how we all react. And then like that doesn't mean me as like saying as an egoist, I'm going through life and being like analyzing everything like it's some like video game and be like, this thing has happened, which one do you pick? Like, no, I'm still just kind of like, I have my tendencies because of the way I've acted throughout life, which I like to think is generally a decent person. So I don't think a lot of people try to like characterize it as like this makes you a selfish person. Yes, sure, but like in a similar type Randian sense of selfishness of like,
Right.
yeah, me being a cunt to everyone is like not probably going to lead to a good life for me, right? Like, why would I want to act that way? So,
Right.
yeah, it doesn't feel good and it doesn't work out well for me. So,
Yeah. And I mean, if I were to characterize at least Rand's, rational egoism, not necessarily, the one she held, but just the idea of rational egoism, or maybe even just saying like Aristotelian egoism, regardless of what Rand thought, it would really just be acknowledging cause and effect and then incorporating it into your logical thinking. And that is really something that,
yeah.
logically speaking, people should just be doing.
Yeah, I also think it's an order of priority and like starting to change the way you think about things. And I think like if you start applying that thinking also to like, especially if you're getting into actual political philosophy, which I feel like is even debatable whether egoism is considered political philosophy, like because the idea is you start from yourself and you work outward. And I think that's a proper way to kind of prioritize your life, which then people will get like when you get to especially close familial relationships, they'll say stuff like, oh well, you have a duty to your family, you have duty to your so they do try to flip it there, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it. For example, like with my kids, like if like I'm with my like I feel like it's kind of a messed up way to look at it if you're like I'm placing them before me by being with them. Like no, they are a priority to me. Like this satisfies my ego. I like my family, I like being around them. So I mean, I know I think it's a good way to kind of approach it, and it's also kind of gets into the idea of like, which maybe we'll get into with agorism or even like hoppyism. I've said many times that like what Hoppe calls for what must be done. Like while I think personally, ultimately the agorism praxis is probably preferable. That's my vibe. I do think that like if there is any other political like thing that has actual probably like legitimate results to be had would be something along like what must be done, but which is more local, which to my in my head like something like an agorism is like hyper local, and then hoppyism is just a little bit less because it's like really talking about like on the community level. So this is all like thoughts that you can kind of like almost conclude from following like an objectivism or egoism type of logical framework, I guess.
So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily characterize agorism as like, extremely like local, like compared
Yeah,
to, because it is individual, right? And it does,
yeah,
regard individual action as like important. But of course, like there can be like, or essentially there has to be networking, right? In
yeah.
a lot of ways, like,
But
black market
it's
activity.
entrepreneurial in the sense that it's each individual performing actions, and it's
Yeah.
everything starts and it's, I guess, not ends with you, but you get what I mean. Like I get what you're saying, that you
Yeah.
would trade between people, but yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, for sure. But I was just saying it in the fact that like Hoppianism, or at least localism within Hoppianism, the way I see it, I used to actually like think, okay, well, actually this does make sense as a political solution. But for me personally, what kind of got me away from that was the idea that, and this is actually something I really want to get into the debate between like Sal the Agorist and, or he says Agorist and you say Agorist too, and Dave Smith, right? And the thing is, like that debate, like, and Sal's like understanding of Konkin, or at least Konkin's work in Agorism, is kind of like right at where like Konkin died, and that's about it. And that's not to like knock him or anything. It's just there have been other like contributions made, like less known, but at least like more of a developed understanding that I feel like really could have been put into that debate. And I mean, there were a lot of points Dave was making. I was re-listening to that debate before this, and I was like, man, like knowing what I know now, because I listened to it back in the past, and I was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe Dave's making sense, but like now I'm like, wait a minute, there's so many things that I could say that like essentially are just like, because of my new understanding, I could essentially refute a lot of what he's saying. But the idea here being, and let me actually get into what the point is, of why I would say like I've moved away from it a bit, is because states have certain incentives, inherently speaking. And, it's not just Congress, because a lot of people like to say, well, nothing happens in Washington because Congress has incentives. When people go in there, they're put through the meat grinder. And essentially, if they don't agree with what needs to happen for the state to operate and, for the money to be printed and all that, they'll be executed or like removed or just taken out of office or not moving up where they need to, or where they want to go up, at least in a leadership position. But I mean, like, if anything, what I've come to realize is, well, first of all, like, what states actually need are to uphold, well, their militia and their bank. Like they need to be able to control all of the guns and the money. That's how they hold on to power. And the thing with that is that local governments are almost just really like puppet governments of the governments above them. And the thing with that is, when you look at it that way, I mean, it's almost as if the local governments, even regardless if they're puppets or not of the governments above them, they almost just have to operate in that same sense, like with those same incentives. So they have to like also like keep that power, like, or at least keep holding on to it. So it almost makes it so that like, if you try to really challenge what the state wants to do in order to keep that power, you're not really going to get far or really do anything at all.
I actually kind of agree. This is like where, like, kind of what I think is a fatal flaw in Hoppianism, and I'm sure there'll probably be some Hoppians upset at me. Is I do think over time, yes, it would collapse due to the same incentive problems that are happening at a larger degree. I think they're at a local government. You're able, it's more amenable to mitigating those incentives. So I guess if I'm looking across a slew of different governmental options of like praxis, like which one is going to have the most high time preference and which low time preference, like degradation of society, or maybe even a slight pushback, it would probably be Hoppianism. But yes, I guess over time it would probably collapse. So I guess it'd be kind of the same idea with like agorism, where you have like, essentially everyone on an individual level. I mean, with some, not, I guess not technically everyone. There'd still be some people who work in a structure under people, like kind of a, it's not saying everyone has to be an entrepreneur. I feel like that's one common misconception. It's almost just encourages everyone trying to be an entrepreneur. But if you want to be a wage worker, whatever, it's just saying in like this type of society that would be, it's preferable. My point is getting at is like with agorism, the concept being is everyone, not everyone, I don't need to qualify that again, being an entrepreneur. It's kind of the same idea as like if there are a bunch of what must be done towns like occur popping up, that can kind of be a force that pushes back because of the decentralized nature. But with like an agorist type, situation, that's even more decentralized. But yeah, I get what you mean with the Hoppianism. I just think like if I'm looking across as a spectrum, it's like I guess Hoppianism is preferred. It's the one that I'm like, okay, maybe something could come of that, because I guess theoretically a few towns could start turning back their rules and start like slowly making it more oriented. But I just feel like inevitably within these structures that prop up this new setup of like a Hoppianism type, framework across the country, different areas are going to start like kind of becoming captured powers, essentially, in the sense that they start, some of those places fall to the incentives you just laid out, and then that kind of model starts to spread, and then you're just in a different. Then we're just in a similar thing, but with whatever prevailing fucking governmental structures going on at that point. So.
Right. And so just some of the other points I had on that really, like pretty much like, let's see, I wrote some of them down just so I could have them for here because it was a long debate and I was just kind of trying to see, let's see. Oh yeah. So like shout out to Esso though of Back Alley Philosophy. He's like one of the guys, I don't know if you know him, but he's a bit controversial. Like, but regardless of people's takes on him, he actually has contributed a lot to the Agorist methodology and just like understanding of anarchism. Yeah, so I don't think like, because I think one thing Sal said was that like voting and like campaigning are unethical or immoral, I think was the term he used. Like one thing I would say to that is that like it's not really the idea that those things themselves are immoral. Yes, what you would do when you're in office and what you would have to do necessarily because of the incentives would be something immoral. But I would say like essentially, I would just say those are counterproductive things. Those are things that take away resources from being, those are things that take away resources from being able to actually be productive. And if anything, I think the problem is because, you know, so like you'll have like, you know, people that'll say, well, it's about spreading the message. I know that's a point Dave brought up, but my counter to that would be almost that like, the state has a lot of tools as far as propaganda goes. And I know you know this because you've looked into this a lot with your series, right? Many of them. And the thing with this is that if the state wants to co-opt libertarianism, it will. And I literally had somebody, she's one of the people that watches the show, Sude. She was saying like, she's from Turkey, right? And she was saying that there are a lot of like people who are like practicers of Islam, but they claim to be libertarian. And then there are some that are like, you know, that are secular and actually libertarian, but they realize that the ones that are saying they're both Islamic and libertarian, first of all, they try to like justify Sharia law, like because like they're like, oh well, Hoppe says X and X, and you know this and that, like you know therefore like you know if it's voluntary, you know Sharia law is okay. And I
would agree with that. To be fair, it depends on the context because I think for one, I'm not an Islamic scholar. I'm sure maybe some rightoids might get upset with me, but I don't have a deep enough understanding of all the different sects of Islam and all their different understandings of what Sharia law is to understand like if that could be implemented in a voluntary fashion. But theoretically, if it can, and I don't see why like some of the more friendly interpretations I've heard, some of them I don't see why they can't, but I guess it depends on the details of what you really mean by that.
Yeah. So I mean, like the problem there being with like contract law, there's issues with it. Essentially, you can't really sell yourself into slavery. I don't agree with that. I don't know if you do. But I
don't know. That's a mind fuck.
It's not.
Well,
I would say it's not.
I've listened to Walter Block break it down, and it's a bit of a mind fuck, and I'm pretty sure it's like. You sort of can, but it's like a contract. Technically, you can break at any time,
right.
But they could bind you to. But then if you break this contract, you owe something. Yeah, I know it's a renowned situation that Walter Block got in trouble for because somebody asked him, and him just being like a political philosopher was like, well, I don't know. Let's explore this question. If so-and-so owns their labor, and then they I can't remember what news organization they tried to blast him and make it sound like he was trying to advocate for slavery. And you're like, no, you asked him a question. Like, he's not advocating for slavery. He was just kind of like, I don't know. Let's think about this.
Yeah. But I think like, you know, well, first of all, I'm just going to say I disagree with it just because of like, well, first of all, one of the punishments would be like death penalty for certain things. But I think mainly that is just if you kill somebody, but still like agreeing to saying, okay, I agree to the punishment of death penalty is sort of the same thing as saying I agree to be a slave. Like if you really don't want to die at that point, like I think you have every right to break the contract and be like, okay, no, I don't want to be in this contract anymore.
I think the concept with Block, if I remember, is that like theoretically you can't sell your future self because you're like your ego or whatever the hell. I wish I could remember the specifics. It is funny to like break it down on like a autistic like libertarian level. It'd be like, well, can you? And it's like sort of, but not really. Like it's like a weird contractual thing is the way he explained it. Like you can, but you can break that contract at any time.
Right. The point being they almost make it like a social contract sort of thing. Cause like, what if you have kids, right? That's not really something that you can like, you know, bring them into, you know, speaking like if you're talking about actual like libertarian ethics. And also like you're not supposed to be like, you know, homosexual in public in Sharia law. So like the thing with that would be like, okay, well, what if you had like a teenager who's like, okay, yeah, I'm like, he's gone through puberty already. He's like, yeah, I'm gay, like whatever. I don't know. Like, you know, I don't think people are naturally gay, but you know, that's my own thing. But just saying, I'm just saying like he's saying that, well, okay, then what? So like you're now subjecting like somebody who didn't agree to this contract to the contract of Sharia law. You know, it just, there's a lot of ways in which it can become
Yes,
like, you know,
it would
really
probably have to be a very, very, very loose understanding of Islam. Like
yeah,
I think you probably are aware of this. Like part of my journey was like breaking away from religion. So it's like I'm like hesitant to say that's not the case because I know coming from Christianity, there's so many different understandings of it. And you just like for me with these ancient texts, you almost just have to come to the point of like I don't know. There could be anyone with any interpretation, so I kind of have to evaluate on a different basis. There's so many different sects of Islam. There's so many different sects of Christianity, and like, yeah, they're all reading the same book, but it's written in such a vague fucking fashion that pretty much anyone can kind of somewhat use it to justify. It's the same thing every time. People will bring up like quotes saying Jesus was a communist or Jesus was a capitalist, and it's like, no, it's really you can kind of take your pick based on the text. Like if you want to cherry pick things that Jesus said, you can kind of paint them to be whatever, and
right.
especially if you're dealing with more looser concepts than that, you can go wild. So
Yeah. Well,
they're
personally,
big-ass
I paint him to be black.
yeah.
Yeah, but my point with that actually being like, you know, the Turkish libertarians example of the people that say, well, Sharia law is like valid under natural law and Rothbard was okay with it and so on, something about that, right? But the thing with it being that basically I'm saying like there are people who are known within, you know, Turkey to actually be like paid by the government essentially to like promote the synthesis of anarcho-capitalism and like Islam, and basically to almost co-opt, or not even almost, to co-opt libertarianism and make it so that like, okay, basically, you know, what we want said about libertarianism is coming through us, not through actual people of influence who know what they're talking about when it comes to theory. Like it's almost just their version of feds, right? And so, I mean, they are feds, like it's not even, you know, a difference between them. But my point there being basically like anybody who runs for office as a libertarian is almost, I mean, like susceptible to not even just necessarily being a Fed, but having their ideas like construed in the media in a way, or by the state in a way that, or through whatever like propaganda methods they have, to make it seem like libertarianism is something it's not, or make it seem like libertarian's actually a good thing, but except for like when it's not a good thing, like they're like, you know, anarchism's not a good thing, but you know, here's why we need to roll back the state a little bit, and like, you know, except for, you know, the state actually is ethical, it's just it needs to be smaller, like, and so on and so forth. And I think that like, you know, even Konkin, he talked about a time in which the government would likely have to do that when it doesn't have the resources to be at the size it is now. It's going to probably have to actually roll back things, and you know, who better than a libertarian quote unquote politician to come in and say, well, you know, we need the government to defend you from the government, and so here's why we're going to, you know, remove things and like agencies and abolish things and lower taxes and so on and so forth. But even when you get to the point where there's a libertarian quote unquote politician who says, well, you know, you actually need the government to end the state for you, they're probably just going to make it seem as if there's some sort of transition period where it's not really a transition period from the state to anarchy, but you know, they'll have their peacekeepers that just make sure that nobody's getting too out of order while the state's dismantling itself. And it's really just the state in an attempt to keep itself afloat at the last, you know, struggle. Like it's just letting its last breaths out, trying to strangle you back.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, but I pretty much mostly agree.
Yeah.
A good example though would be I think people should be hesitant with this Argentina stuff going on with Javier Milei. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I get both sides of it. There are people who are like, "Oh, this is awesome. It's showing us our message is taking off." That's true, but this is also like probably one of our first like big foots forward on that stage so far as something that represents our ideas. And I'm sorry if you've gotten to a point with a deep understanding of like anarcho-capitalism and you don't see some guy, you know, shaking around like Israeli flags as like a whoa, what does that mean? Then I don't know. You need to go back to the drawing board and think about it a little bit, maybe understand some world history and like think about the implications of that. Like, because what does it mean to support Israel? And to be fair, this has kind of become like a low thinking thing where a lot of people haven't gotten that deep in theory and they just go, oh, that's just like the countervailing, like general good thing. Like we like Jews, like, you know, like we don't want to be seen as disliking Jews. Why can't the Jews have a state? And like, I guess theoretically, if they follow private property laws, whatever, I don't give a shit if they had whatever this thing they want to call a state. It wouldn't be a state at that point. But either way, that's not how that country is really constructed. So I think like if you as an ANCAP see that, and him supposedly supposed to be like a very like principled ANCAP, that's what everyone keeps talking about, yet mauling over Israel. I don't know. It makes me wonder. And I don't know. To be fair, I don't follow him closely. I don't know. Maybe he's made statements like saying he doesn't like some of the stuff they're doing over there or whatever. Maybe he has a nuanced understanding of it, but it's a red flag to me, and it's just illustrative of kind of what I'm getting at. Because for all we know, especially in like what's going on right now, if this guy came out as like a huge Zionism stan and say he was perfect in every other way, what does that paint us as? Like, what does that make us look like going forward? What does that marry our ideas to in the zeitgeist? So, and I think that stuff matters.
Yeah. And we have a chat here from Zach. He says, just remember, it takes Nazism to finally support a Jewish state.
Yeah, no, for real. It kind of did. Like, if you study their history, it was like it literally the project was centered around anti-Semitism. And as if you have something that's centered around anti-something, it will create that thing to justify its existence. And I'm not saying they created the Nazis. I'm saying they created the social forces where they fed off of that. And yes, there were probably examples, obviously the Nazi one, where there was legitimate, I guess you could say, anti-Semitism, and Jews did suffer. But also, this creates, this incentives this creates, is so that even when there's times of good, like people, like good interactions between Jews and other races or whatever, you're always looking for it to continue justifying your existence. And I think that's become like a cancer personally on the Jewish people. I think it's created this like victim mentality within some of that culture. I mean, not everyone obviously gets touched by it, but it becomes like part of a lot of that identity of like, we must support Israel, which to the extent that it's like, that's a lot of the identity of just the generic American right. Which is like, why? Why do you need to support a Jewish state overseas? Just because it's Jewish? Just because you don't want to look like what other state is there that you have to support? I have to support Brazil because I don't want to be seen as not liking Brazilians? Like, it makes no sense. I don't know. And it like plays, I think with the Jew thing, it plays off both sides, because it has a national identity, it has a religious identity, it has a cultural identity. And so it kind of plays from all angles to where like it's able to like suck off this sympathy from all different angles, So, yeah.
I don't know. I think I contest the idea that, like an ethno state is essentially okay so long as it's like, private, right? Like, I think, first of all, like I would just say, like, why wouldn't you just have free association at that point, like between the people like living in that, area, and just homestead near each other? You don't really need like the legal system of a covenant community to really just have that sort of interaction with each other. But also, I mean, I think it gets into a problem when it's like, okay, let's say you claim you have or you claim you own that land, and you say, okay, well, now anybody that enters is breaking the covenant, like the rules of the covenant. I mean, like the people that were outside of the land don't really, I mean, they didn't really sign anything to say like, I agree to your covenant agreement. So really just subjecting them to the laws once they cross a border is just essentially reverting back to statism, which I think there's a problem. Like a lot of like people within the ANCAP movement. And I think like, like you've said, like, even you said, people that have followed Hoppe or his ideas like tend to have more vulgar takes, like in how they not only just interpret his work, but just in general, like they may just have been vulgar the whole time and then just say, okay, well, this is my justification for being a libertarian. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my point with that.
No, I agree. There was something I wanted to pick out there, but I totally forgot at the end there.
Yeah, so the ethno-state part. I mean,
oh yeah. No, I would say on the ethno-state point, because a lot of time this argument about Israel, I think, gets tied up in like the initial land deal, and like to what degree was that really sort of a private? Like, how can we justify? Like, was this legit? Like, it gets into this like weird. But at the end of the day, like, obviously we don't like states. Like, so even if this had been done properly and they had like cut off a little area and had some sort of proto closer to capitalist system to where they didn't actually oust all these people, then it would be preferable in like to the alternative, but it's still a state at the end of the day. So it's just that it's a more recent example of within world history. And a lot of people bring up colonialism, but like, and it sounds cringy and like leftoid-ish to be like, oh, bad colonialism. But it's like, that's because it was like a thing of the past, generally speaking. And so you kind of come off as a lefty that's like saying slavery's bad. And it's like, who cares? Like, everyone agrees slavery's bad at this point. But the thing is, though, this is unique when we're speaking about Israel, because it's like one of the most recent examples of it. So it's like, okay, but like this is it in our lifetime. So, or at least like our parents or grandparents' lifetime. So it's like, this is more fresh, and like, can we at least admit this is not cool? Like, is that asking too much? Like, and but the point is getting is like, had they carved it out with private, it would just be preferable to like, so, and yeah, I get what you were getting at. Like, theoretically, maybe you could have a voluntary ethno state, or at least an area of people who choose to like, own some property together and be like, only this race, whatever. I don't care. But it's when you're impeding on the rights of individuals, which is a different thing. And obviously, it even been set up under the proper, like, they bought it private property. At this point, it's so socialist, it doesn't matter anyways. Like, they didn't follow it. It's just a matter of preferences, I think. Like, compared to other states, I think it's pretty. Its origin story is pretty fucked. So
Yeah. Another thing that I thought, like from the debate that we were mentioning before with agorism versus politics, was that like basically when it comes to counter economic action, and I actually like to like hear your take on this, like the actions that will and won't take down the state. That's something that agorism obviously lays out. But I'm kind of wondering, like, first of all, like what your take would be on what kinds of things would be conducive to just ending the state.
well, I mean, I guess that's a loaded, like, it's a lot
Yeah.
there. I mean, I guess just I guess that I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I think, like, yeah, I know we talk like in like theory and like how this could lead to that, but at the end of the day, this is where I guess like kind of like the egoism leanings. I think you need to be doing it for yourself, and you need to have the right reasons. And I think understanding libertarianism, understanding Austrian economics, it starts to allow you to realize that, oh, these course of actions are better for me in the long run. It's a more of a low time preference thing. Becoming more of an entrepreneur, creating alternate like streams of income, becoming not dependent on a corporation or a government. These are things that will lead to a longer, like, to lead to a better life overall. Like, yes, it's not going to be easy. Like, this is why I said it's low time preference. You're going to probably have to work harder, especially in the beginning, or whatever, but it's going to be far more rewarding, and likely probably, like, especially if you start younger, as like, and don't get on the teat of the government early, like, you will likely, be set up better than other people who then just take the cushy, 9 to 5 or a government job or whatever. I think that's the proper way to look at it. But obviously, if people start applying these principles more often and start realizing this, I think you create a stronger market, and you kind of degrade the power of government, because people aren't looking for those corporate jobs. They aren't looking for those government jobs. Yeah, they may be raising like they may raise the rate for whatever government work, or whatever thing. But I think people will start to realize, especially in light of, say, some of the COVID stuff, that like at the end of the day, once you put yourself in that situation, you're their bitch. So like if you get too dependent on any like entity like that, you're putting yourself in a precarious position. So that like you could still, like, in an agorist framework, still be a wage worker, but you'd be in this theoretical situation where people are far more agorist minded. Like, you would, if you're going to be a wage worker, it's like you're going to be probably working for some entrepreneur that, like, most likely is just going to be looking to make sure you perform. And it isn't going to be have a lot of the nasty incentives that we see with corporations or government jobs. I think it's just better in the long run, even for the people who want to have like wage type stuff. And I do think that, like, theoretically, yes, obviously, if I could snap my fingers today and like everyone incrementally started like moving further into the agora, yeah, obviously, like within a friggin' year or so, like, it theoretically, I mean, if everyone did that, the government would cease to exist. It just would. Obviously, this is like a theoretical, like, so like I'm not saying that would ever happen, but yeah, I mean, and I think at the end of the day, like, kind of the point I was getting at too, with like egoism and kind of like matters of priority, like individual, local, going out from there. I think operating in this way kind of works like that too. Like, if you move to areas where, it's more amenable for you to perform these actions, I think other people then move to that area with you, create sort of localized networks. And also on top of that, you will also create international and local networks, being, in the manner that technology is today, we can interact like that. It just becomes such a crazy labyrinth of nodes, like a decentralized network, that it just is, a state has no means of competing with something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, when you say, it depends on like what's in your self-interest, I would agree. Like the thing there being that, it's not going to be just because everybody starts finding libertarianism and agorism and even learning about what we're talking about right here, but it's more so just going to be like, well, the reason people would at least engage in counter economic action would be because it's beneficial to them. And this was one that was brought up on my last stream by Filthy Heretic. He was saying basically like the idea of like piracy. Back in the day when it first started, like essentially the government would say, okay, well, you shouldn't do that. And there would be like commercials and ads and all that saying like you wouldn't steal a car and all that. But now, if people want a free book online, they can just go do that. And you don't really have to go to the bookstore and buy a book. You don't have to, buy music. You don't have to do all that. It's similar in other regards. Once there's something that you can do that's, maybe not the most approved thing, but it's in your interest so much so that like the reward outweighs the risk, you're going to start doing it. Let's see. We have Ignis in here saying, I saw his comment, so I thought I'd read it just to not be off track with what I'm saying first. But he said, one issue I see with Agorism is that falling tax revenue is met with calls to further expand government power and intervention. How is this addressed, if at all? Okay. Let's see.
I would say kind of the different things I pointed out would kind of mitigate that. Like if you are moving yourself further into the agora, generally speaking, I don't think technically like relocating is necessarily, agorist or not agorist, but I think it generally tends to go with it. So I think the relocating to areas where there's less, government power that can be exerted. I think stuff like that. I totally forgot my point. It's fucking lost it. But yeah, I do think there are ways that this will be mitigated. Like I get it, they would try to stamp down, but I just think the rising, counter market would kind of mitigate their ability to do so. And like, yes, they would still have areas where like, I think, going forward, we're going to see as people start moving more towards their incentives, towards freedom, towards whatever, I think we'll see an inverse of that. And we'll see, as those people are leaving, people are staying in those other hellholes, the places that will likely become the futuristic, like smart cities or whatever. And I think we will see more of a crackdown there. So yes, their tax cattle will get clamped down on more, but the idea is to make yourself less of a or a tax cattle. And so I think, now is the time for individuals, and, really, I feel like a lot of people are late on the game. Anybody's late if you're not doing it already. Start moving, doing what you can, what you can, where you can, making changes in your life, do something to kind of move towards that way. Even if it's just like networking and just getting to know people. I mean, it's something. Most people don't do anything. So yeah. We have a changing world, and if you're not trying to do anything to adapt to it, you're going to get, what's the quote? Like, if you're not making a plan, you're in someone else's or something like that. So I think that's kind of idea. I think you need to gravitate to what you want to see in the future, and I think that's how we manifest it to some extent. And yeah, no one's saying it's gonna be rosy, and there's nothing's gonna go bad at all. I just think if you have two paths to choose, here's the one to go.
Yeah. And I mean, there are plenty of technologies, because when it comes to agorism, it's not just about the counter economic action that people are doing between each other. It's the technological innovations that are coming out of that, or people that even are just motivated to, create new technologies that, if anything, are subversive to the government, even if they don't mean to do it. And the thing with that being is that you have like, it's often said like Bitcoin, 3D printing guns. I mean, even large language models like a ChatGPT, like that is irreversible what that has done. And the thing with that being that, like, basically, as it becomes harder for governments to enforce laws, in the sense like, now there is literally competing money, and like we're getting closer to actually, solidifying that like as a system that, people are using, though, obviously it could be more popular. But the thing is, there are people that are able to transact that way without being tracked as easily. And they're, again, 3D printing guns at home, you're able to do that without having to register with the state. So things like that, like essentially make it so that the state can't enforce what it needs to enforce. And as that happens, I mean, the state is going to try and become, or clamp down more on you for that. They're going to try and see who has guns in their home. They're going to try and, whether it's, somehow being able to spy on you better, or, doing, I don't think they're going to go door to door, but, who knows, right? Like maybe if they suspect somebody, they'll go to that person's house. But yeah, just in a lot of ways, the state will try more and more, because that's what it's in its inherent interest to do. It's going to start trying to, find the perpetrators and start putting an end to all the action that's harming it, and recalibrate for that. But basically, the thing here being is that well, the technologies themselves are what are crippling the state. So the more that people find it in their interest to use those, the state's actually going to be, having a harder and harder time enforcing anything, and eventually it'll crumble. So let's see.
I would
Zach
say
says they did during Katrina.
Yeah, no, so they're obviously going to take advantage of chances when they can do stuff like that for sure. I mean, no one's saying there won't be isolated examples where people get screwed over, but it's just a matter of like, what do you want to do? God, I had a point I wanted to bring up, but I totally forgot.
All right, we got Into the Agora. He's another guy that comes on the show pretty often. He says, even if people might want authoritarian practices from the government, if the state isn't able to enforce those laws, people's wishes become irrelevant. True.
Yeah, okay, I remember the point I wanted to get at. That kind of jogged my memory. Yeah, because like at the end of the day, like, and this kind of comes somewhat to Konkin's like class theory, but I think you can kind of understand it from a simpler. I don't know if it was Hayek or who it was, but I believe it was mentioned in a couple of like one or two of Rothbard's books at least. The concept, and he got the concept from somebody else. Like how we have producers and we have predators. And in the day, like, do you want to produce or do you want to like contribute to the predation? And obviously, there's mixes of it. Like, I think when you're dealing, like, if you're working for a corporate entity, like, don't get me wrong, like, you're not. I don't think that's inherently unethical, and I don't even think like theoretically there might be, I guess, actually depending on if you want to get definitions, but there would be things similar to corporations likely in a free market. But we understand that these things are mostly captured arms of the wing of the state. Like they literally have to like become incorporated with the state.
Yeah.
So I mean. The point I'm getting at is like you are to some extent investing in that predation by mixing your labor with them, if you will. So it's like a matter of like which way do you want to go? Do you want to move towards production? Do you want to move towards predation? And I think the thing with the production is this kind of comes into the idea of you're getting at with the technologies. As we invest more with the production, it's so harder for the predation to keep up. And we have gotten to a point with like technology where it's just like exponentially growing. And yes, I get it when you're dealing with a centralized power, they can muster up forces to make like big attacks. But it's the idea of like, I don't know, a fucking 1,000-pound grizzly bear fighting, 5 hives of bees. It's like, it's a silly fight. Like, yeah, he'll probably kill some bees, but the other day, like, I bet you that many hornets or whatever might even be able to kill a bear. So it's the idea of that, like, they just can't, like, if you're dealing with like, say with like AI, like that is huge. Like, I'm not a big tech guy, but I can understand the implications of that going forward. That's going to enable people to produce things so much quicker and be able to bypass, and people are going to get used to these, technological tools before the government is. I mean, don't get me wrong, the government will hire people, but due to their bloat and like how their incentive structure works, they tend to not get the best people. They'll be able to like steal the people's money and like kind of make like more, I don't know, the more isolated, strong shows of force. But at the end of the day, we're more powerful than them. We just are. So like, I mean, I'm no one's saying like with agorism, make yourself a target. That's kind of the point, is you're just like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it comes down to like the risk you're willing to take. Because if you want to be that guy that lives out in the woods, pays no taxes, whatever, like, just completely is just bucking the system, cool, more power to you. But generally speaking, like, agorism can be people that are like interacting in normal, corporate America or whatever. They're just like practicing it in a more agorist way, or just someone who interacts in the market in all sorts of different ways. So it's just moving more towards production, less towards the predation.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely lost what I was going to say about that. It was, I guess, just having to do with the interests. I don't know. Let me read chat, see if it comes back to me real quick. Let's see. We have Zach saying, so long as the state has been weakened, there becomes no incentive for it to eventually exist, as no one will even want to buy in. Or I guess he just meant for it to exist. He doesn't know why you put it eventually. We have Into the Agora saying, and I think people's mentalities will change as they recognize how beneficial property rights are in their own practical day-to-day.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, once I guess I do think this is like, I think maybe where some libertarians might get into wishful thinking land and be like, well, in our future world will be great. But I do think that like, I don't know, it may be a fluctuation. I do think in probably the long arm of time that eventually it will arc towards liberty greatly. But I wouldn't be surprised because I mean, if you've read Konkin's New Libertarian Manifesto, and he kind of goes into the idea of the phases. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like an oscillation, which I think he even kind of explained, to where the state slowly starts dying, the counter economy grows, the agora grows, and then eventually, the state dies off. But he even has made the point that, and that's kind of what I was alluding to with them kind of like retreating into their power centers, that typically being the cities or maybe even blue areas, typically, generally speaking, more often. And they will kind of like harbor their forces there, and they could kind of make a comeback and like kind of spread out from there. But now, like, what does that look like for our future? I think overall that like probably will decrease their governmental power, over time. But now, who's to say that there won't be somehow that they take back over because they like have recuperated some spot, and then we have another whole fourth turning or whatever the hell, where it's a whole other cycle to buck the state. But at the end of the day, even with all this like theoretical where this stuff goes in the future, I think even like no matter what, people are especially the sooner they do it, and the more cunning they are about it, they'll be able to set themselves up and the future generations to prosper. And this is
Yeah,
where
so
I think
I,
you start
I
doing
got it
that.
back. It was basically you were talking about corporations. Yeah, I don't think corporations would exist without the state, just because these like behemoths of firms are just incentivized to act the way they are, because the state essentially like gamifies their actions through a lot of regulations, like essentially making it so that they're just almost incentivized to act in a way that they're continually scaling up and becoming the corporations that they are, and acting the way that they are, essentially not really caring about I guess satisfaction of customers and like actually producing a good product, but essentially they're just able to hold a large share of the market just by having got up at that time, and the state's basically like, okay, well, you're here, let's give Walmart eminent domain, or let's ensure that the competition's smashed by the other barriers to entry in the market, like so on and so forth. And also like the idea, like you brought up the term wage slave, right? And I know you guys talked about that on that debate, but the thing with it being that like it's not the fact that you're trading a certain amount of money for your time. It's the fact that the state has essentially. I see you dying over there, man. You good?
Oh yeah, just my allergies are acting up, so I was just
Okay.
hacking up my lung real
Just
quick.
making sure, just making sure you were good. But yeah, no, essentially the state, what was it? Oh yeah. When it comes to like 9-to-5 jobs, or like jobs in which you're working 40 plus hours a week in general, the state is essentially looking to have that tax cattle that it can control and have like, or people that have no time, people that are just investing their money like into taxes and, getting parts of their paycheck taken from them, so on and so forth. Essentially the system that has been created, and it's not just about the taxes, but it's just about all the things around it, like essentially like making it so that your only purpose in life is work, and your only purpose in life is not just work that is it's not work that's beneficial for you, it's work that's beneficial for the firm that is preferred by the state. There's a lot of things about it that make it just so that like it's not necessarily that in and of itself, and it's not like wage, like working for a wage is not the slavery, and the wage system is not necessarily like the slavery, but it is an aspect of the slavery that society has been placed under today, and essentially it is just a part of domination over people and their lives. And then
I did want to comment that, because we have been kind of like poking at the debate before. For those who aren't aware, there was forever ago on my channel a Sal the Agorist versus Dave Smith debate, obviously on like kind of, I guess you could say roughly kind of like what the LPMC has done versus like kind of like just agorism broadly, just kind of a discussion on that. And yeah, that there are definitely spots where me and Sal disagree. The wage slave thing, the way he like almost really is like set on like being like, no, I literally mean wage slave. And you're like, okay. So that's like, I guess we disagree there. And as you brought up before, the ethical idea, like I typically take like the Lysander Spooner approach when it comes to like voting, that in the sense that like, yeah, like I would say that, like, say for example, you vote for something that your intentions are to like reduce the oppression that you're experiencing or whatever by the state and others. You're not like even trying to victimize anything. You're literally, say you're voting to reduce taxes, then I think like the idea of morality there is that's like, I don't see why that would be immoral. Like I struggle to understand the more like, and I know earlier we were talking about morality being subjective. I mean by like any rational understanding of like a moral system, you know, like a prevailing one, really one that I would think is amenable. Like I don't see how that makes sense that you could, you know, make the claim that voting is immoral. But now I could say, you know, I have made the point many times that I don't think it works out towards your ends in the long run. So and it's kind of the same idea with the corporation thing. Like, yeah, it's not. I don't think you're literally becoming a wage slave. I do think that kind of comes off as commie gobbledygook. And when I use wage slave, I'm mostly just being kind of like silly. Like I'm not like meaning it literally. And I think Konkin may have used wage slave in his writings. I never interpret as him meaning it like in a literal sense. And he'd even made points, I think, in you know, in his books about how in a agorist system there could be wage slaves. He just says it would kind of de-incentivize you know, people wanting to do that, you know, if you have more of an entrepreneurial type system. But yeah, he'd say there'd still be people who work for wages. So I don't know. I guess I never understood that. So yeah, there was a lot of that there. I mean, that was at a time that like, yeah, I mean, looking back now, I mean, maybe I would have probably took on that challenge myself, but I was like kind of earlier in the game. And I was just kind of like, well, no, I'll bring these two big dogs together. No one really wanted to hear me. But now, like, if I was to do it now, I'd probably do it. Although now I don't even really have an interest in arguing it because I've like kind of, if anyone's pays attention to my show, it's like definitely morphed into more of a parapolitics show at this point.
Yeah.
But I'm sure at some point I'll probably morph back to theory because really all my show is an ADD project to like follow whatever the hell I'm spurging out about at the time. And that's just kind of how it manifests in my show. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing with the like, again, going back to the wage slave idea, you know, we're already all enslaved. And the thing is like the wage aspect of it, or the job, working the job and the 40 hours a week and all that, that's really just what the state kind of wants you to do to control you. Like essentially that it's sort of just an effect of it, or maybe I should just say like, it's sort of like a guardrail that you're placed under so that you can't really like act against the state. Like, and I mean, it's supposed to take the spirit out of you. It's supposed to be demoralizing. It's supposed to like be like soul crushing. So it's not a good situation for most people to actually be in, you know, essentially like, and especially if you're not negotiating the terms like to your wishes, and you really don't have an ability to do that because of the state standardization of corporations. But yeah, like, I mean, we could probably move just like past that specific point. That's pretty much what I'm saying there with that. Like it's used for the control basically. Let's see. We have Into the Agora saying, keep in mind, Per Byland and Long have made these arguments against corporation type firms existing without state privilege. So this isn't totally out there. Isn't a totally out there. Sorry, Austrian idea or non-Austrian idea.
I agree. I don't think saying that that there likely wouldn't be things that are similar to corporations. Obviously, there literally wouldn't be corporations because the concept of a corporation is like it's incorporated into the state. They have to like file for that. But like, I guess then people bring it to like a theoretical of like, would there be structures like corporations? And it's like, okay, maybe there'd be something resembling it. And then it kind of gets down to the root of like, you know, whether you should be able to do wage labor. And it's like, yes, you should be able to do wage labor, but the point is that there would be less so of that. And even then it would be like on an entrepreneurial level to like, hey, you know, there's some guy who, you know, makes widgets and he has, you know, 5, you know, dudes that work for, you know, $20 an hour putting widgets together or whatever.
Yeah.
So it'd be much more decentralized and more entrepreneurial, and you'd be working for usually like one guy or maybe one guy who works for another guy, even in an extreme case. So.
Yeah, see, I just categorize that as like a company, and I don't think companies wouldn't exist.
Exactly.
But I think they wouldn't be these large, like, you know, centralized or organizations with so much control over the market. You know, really, like, it would be a lot more decentralized in that sense. And what I was going to say before, it had to do with voting. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't think the action of voting for less taxes itself is an unethical act. I don't think that democracy is like legitimate in the sense, well, not just to say like, I mean, everybody agrees with that statement here, but, you know, in the sense that like it's actually taking place the way you think it is. If you're somebody that's like very into, you know, thinking like, oh, well, this is a system that works for people. You know, if you're very politicized, like you're actually wrong. Like democracy is not something that the state is just allowing you to use to control it. It's actually, in a sense, like, let's say if it's a vote for less taxes, it's making you think that you have some sort of say. It makes you think that you're represented. So if the state already needs to reduce taxes, or maybe doesn't, I don't know, one or the other, it'll probably put out the vote, let's say, to reduce taxes. It's like, would you like to reduce taxes, with the assumption that like, well, we kind of could just reduce taxes 5%. And if anything, the economy will actually do better because of it, because there are times where that happens and we can predate more after the fact. Like we will allow there to be more production so that we can predate further. And so, yeah, I don't think it's like unethical to say like, okay, fine, like let me vote for less taxes, and the less taxes happen. Even the state making it so that there are less taxes is not the unethical thing happening here. But yeah, it's just the sense that like the state will do what it's going to do. So pretty much you're saying it really didn't really have any sort of impact. Like just like how one vote doesn't mean anything, I don't think votes in general really mean anything. Like even the majority vote.
I'd push back a little bit and say that yes, I do think your votes can cause to certain actions to occur, and maybe this was an action they likely weren't going to do. Maybe they are kind of somewhat. Obviously, I don't think you're ever really going to be able to create some sort of vote that causes the government to do something they 100% don't want to do, because if you have that sort of consensus within that that behemoth, then it's not going to happen. So generally speaking, it's going to be something within the frames of what they find acceptable anyways. But even theoretically, let's say even the craziest thing, you got to think, multiple orders in the future. What does you voting like do? This kind of like reinvigorates your hope in the system, and kind of does that for other people as well, where you're just better off just being like, oh, who really gives a fuck what they're doing over there? That's kind of my feeling of it. Because yes, like you're generally speaking, yeah, maybe there's going to be this one candidate or this one vote or this one thing, but that's always like, it's like this like eternal hopium is what it is. It's like, it comes off like this guy who an example I've used a lot is like the old ladies that like that are like gambling addicts, but they won the jackpot once like 30 years ago, and they're like, they still remember, and that was like the best day of their life. And it's like, yeah, obviously if you zoom in on that one occasion, say like because people bring up Ron Paul all the time. Okay, he's that one time the old lady hit a jackpot, and you're like, okay, yeah, sure, theoretically you could get a jackpot again, but like, what could you be doing like other stuff? I mean, maybe. I don't know. like where does this lead? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, because we're talking about like big stuff, but I think generally speaking, like investing your time and energy in something that's going to be work out longer in the future is probably better. So
yeah, well, I think the way that the state is built, like initially when it is formed and maintained throughout, its existence, makes it so that even if you really had like a government full of Ron Pauls, I don't think you'll see like, what Ron Paul says he would do as a politician, just because like, for what I'm saying before, like where the state does have organizational interests, does have levels of incentive where people have incentive over others. And, I just don't really think like you'd see like necessarily like if the state, didn't want there to be a minarchist government, or essentially whatever that means, you'd have Ron Paul's come in and then make a minarchist government.
oh yeah, no, what would happen is a follow-up is like I think like say theoretically we got a Ron Paul in every part of government. Like yeah, I do think he would probably make some crazy awesome obviously this is hypothetical. It's literally every member of government. Like I do think they make some theoretical like awesome like minarchist like way better than what we're working with right now. But as you made the point earlier, it's kind of like, and don't get me wrong, that would be great, I guess, ideally. Like, sure, if I could push that button, I'd probably push it because it'd make things better for a short period of time. But it would just delay this thing later in the future to where, because like it's kind of the idea of part of why we're such a behemoth of world power is because we had that period from 1776 to like roughly like the 1900s to like where we had semi-sound stuff. So we became like a friggin' powerhouse financially because of all the freedom that we did have economically. And now that's like slowly slipping away. But yeah, so like, yes, to say a Ron Paul did come in and make this like an amazing minarchist government, it's like, okay, but those guys are going to die eventually. And then now what happens later? So like what government individuals are going to come in that then, then expand the cancer again. So I obviously, yes, I would push this button, but the point being is like, yeah, this is just going to probably create a bigger nightmare probably 200 years in the future. So but whatever, I'd push that button because I guess that makes it great for like my grandkids and then my great grandkids. But yeah,
let's see, so we see Zach saying Ron Paul still took the checks for his district. So I mean, yeah, like,
yeah,
he's a politician. So
yeah, I forget the specifics on that. Like, I know that's one point libertarians always bring up, that like if you were to somehow run a moral administration, you would not have to accept it, because I forget they get something that's somehow tax related if you run or something, or he's meaning, I guess, probably his checks while he was in there.
yeah,
Like,
that's
I
what I
don't
took it
know.
as.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know. My perspective would just be like, yeah, I guess so. Like, yeah, that's maybe you're technically right, but it's like, I don't know. I guess he can kind of use that to, do what he's doing. I don't know. You probably can make some ends justify the means argument there. And I think, sure, maybe it somewhat does there. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess that might be getting the weeds to get too hung up on the fact
Yeah.
that he took a check for doing that. Because, like, let's be real. If he wasn't doing that, he'd be being a doctor. But I guess people can make an argument. At least he'd be providing, like, literal value to the market.
He would if he were doing
Yeah.
that. Let's see. So yeah, I guess we could go into some other stuff. Just, I mean, more about your content. I don't know if you want to mention anything, like, because I was also watching the debate between Dave Smith and Austin Peterson, and we don't have to get into too much of like the Israel and Hamas stuff, but like for me, I was just, it's another one where I was kind of just like frustrated, not about Dave Smith, but it was more so like Austin Peterson, just because I've seen some of the stuff he said on Twitter, and it's like he's trying to, like, in my opinion, it seemed like he was kind of trying to cover the fact that it's like, well, almost it's like he's even more pro-Israel on Twitter than he was trying to make himself seem on the actual episode he did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I generally kind of, and I don't mean this is like a ding against Austin, but I don't know. I guess just don't really normally see him too much on my timeline, so I don't really pay attention. I just kind of saw an opportunity, and like I kind of I'd been reading up more on the Israel stuff when all this kicked off, so I was like, I don't know, I'd like to, kind of cover that on my show. I just saw an opportunity of them bickering online. I was like, fine, whatever. I mean, I kind of knew the outcome of what was going to happen there. Like, because I knew, I saw the arguments he was making. I didn't see them as being strong. Like, don't get me wrong, Austin probably would have murked me in any sort of debate on it, just because I'm not able to like recite the sources and stuff like that.
Right.
But I know the information. But like, if I tried to like argue it, or I mean, I kind of know it. It's like one of those things where like subconsciously, like somewhere between my conscious and subconscious, it's in there. But I wouldn't be able to like recite the way he did. But like, even just from a theory perspective, even from just like the facts on the ground, like, yeah, I knew that was going to be a bloodbath. It kind of was. I mean, if people want to watch it, I mean, especially I guess if you do kind of fall on the Israel side of that, I would suggest watching it, because it is kind of like Dave did kind of do a beat down. I'm trying to be a dick after the fact. I tried to stay partial. I did my best. I thought I did in that debate. That I didn't really get involved at all. So I mean, it was Dave was doing a good enough job anyways. So, and I didn't want to make it seem like a gang up thing. But yes, it was a beatdown. I don't really know what to add to that.
I mean, I'll give it to Dave. It was for sure. And I think like the moment that I went like, holy shit, like, yeah, it's fucking over. Where he was like, talking about basically like Israel intentionally targeting, well, at least the fact that they were targeting Hamas and killing people in the process was essentially premeditated murder, like in the first degree. And when Dave started saying that, I was like, okay, well, yeah, no, it's done. Like,
dude, because his argument too, I guess this is because we probably would have been more appropriate a minute ago, but one of his main arguments that I saw him making on Twitter a lot was that it was like, well, no, this is manslaughter. This isn't murder. And it's like, okay, for one, we can make a legal argument that's nonsense, but even if we were to accept that it's just manslaughter, it's like, that's still a crime. Yeah. So you're just saying that like the government, just like in times of war, you're just carte blanche committing crime is okay? Like, so I just don't see that being a strong argument. They're like, no, it's not murder, it's manslaughter. You're like, okay, well, they're still manslaughtering a lot of people. So I mean, can we admit that this is a crime that is occurring? Like, why are we playing the semantic nonsense? So,
well, come on, nothing's a crime if the government's doing it. How could that be possible?
Exactly. Well, that's kind of like the mindset. You go, oh, like I feel like that's like the sub mindset that's kind of being implied there, is that people go, oh, well, it's not murder, because I feel like for a lot, especially for more of a status mindset, if you're trying to look at crimes of government, especially in times of war, you're like, it needs to just be flat out murder. But it's like, but why are we accepting crime at all in this situation? Because they're like, I feel like for them, they're like, oh, manslaughter? Oh, that's not murder. And you're like, well, I guess the government can do that. And you're like, what? Like, no, it's still a crime, dude. Like, still not okay. Just be like, there's this entity, just do a lot of crime, I guess. Like, yeah. It's like he has the take where it's kind of, well, he was literally justifying it in the sense that like, well, anybody in between the guy that's trying to kill me and me, is just kind of like, they're in the way. So I kind of need to kill the guy that's about to kill me. But essentially,
Right. But and then like it's about that exact argument that Ben Shapiro is like, oh well, it's actually Hamas's fault, folks, that that like, people are dying because, all that blood is on Hamas's hands.
Yeah. No, and it's such a stupid argument. I hate that nonsense because you're like, yeah, I can agree with you that like that's what preceded it and that led to it. But at the end of the day, it's still this entity in this context that is dropping the bombs. So you can't go, no, Hamas did that because you literally just did that. You don't even know how to like explain it to someone without like talking like a child to them. You're like, no, they did that. And you're like, yeah, but they blew up. And okay, but the one thing doesn't necessitate the other. So like, it's not like this set is like one of those like contraptions you see where like a ball falls and then it makes another thing happen. And like, no, like there was a thinking entity that was controlled the next action, and that was you. Like you committed a crime. So yeah, I think that is a silly way of looking at it.
Yeah, look, I mean, like, if a guy with an axe kills somebody that you love, and then, you want to kill him, obviously, because he just did that, but then he like straps a bunch of babies around him, and it's like, okay, are you justified in shooting through those babies to kill him? It's like, no.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. That is a great, like, in that literal situation, if you have someone who is using deadly force against you, and the only way you can stop it is by using deadly force against him at that very moment in time, and there is some innocent that is in the way or could accidentally become hurt, and you're aware of this, like, is that, like, immoral or unjust or whatever word you want to... I don't know, but that's not this specific scenario. Because yes, you could. I don't know. That is a logical quagmire for me. Because it's like
even there, it would be self-defense to kill the guy, but it would be murder to kill the babies. So yeah, I mean, both at the same time.
Yeah, but like I think maybe someone could make some sort of argument. I mean, I don't know. This is like, but I just feel like in that literal specific situation, it's like you are in a situation where like your other option was to die. I mean, this is a crazy hypothetical to begin with, and this is why it's so fucking silly, because it's like, that's not what happened. Someone attacked some of your people, and then days later, you bombed a group of people, some of which may or may not include some of those people who killed those people. So, like, no, this isn't the same scenario whatsoever. This bizarre moral quagmire you've created for us where we are like, well, I don't know, maybe we should think about that. But it's like, no, but that's not what this is. So that's dumb.
Yeah, I mean, it does almost seem like he's trying to equate the two in that scenario, or equate both scenarios in that situation. I get what you're saying with that. So I guess what I wanted to ask about, because like we were talking about the Anarchist Handbook series, and so I wanted to move on to that. Are you still working on those? Like, can we expect more in the future? I know you said you were more doing the parapolitics and the theory is going to come later, but I'm interested because I know you said, I don't think you did the Kropotkin episode, right? Because you said you were like reading up on that at one point.
I don't know if I had ever had someone scheduled for Kropotkin. Like, I really kind of did hit a roadblock when it got to like the lefty stuff, because I mean, the way I envision this series is like, obviously, I know there are definitely parts of the Anarchist Handbook that I kind of don't agree with. I mean, I'm an ANCAP, but I wanted to have people on that I could have a good discussion with, have an interesting, maybe, let them strong man it and not even make an argument. So like say with Kropotkin or something, I wouldn't bring on some commie anarchist to like badger his head. It would be to be cool with him and kind of let him present his idea so people can understand it for the purposes of that. And I haven't linked up networking wise with other anarchists that are of that persuasion that I don't find insufferable. And then but I mean, there are some that I have that I just haven't, like, I don't know, whatever, we just haven't linked up like that or whatever. There's some people I've considered, but I don't know. And then also, I don't know, maybe it's just my impression, but I just feel like with like left anarchists, I feel like a lot of times, and maybe this is just my impression, my bias, I feel, and maybe this is probably maybe just as much in like the right circles, right anarchist circles, but I feel like a lot of them are like, oh yeah, I love Kropotkin, I love this guy, I love that guy, and you're like, but then when you really hear them talk theory, you're like, oh, you really haven't read any of this. You just kind of generally kind of like this vibe. And, I don't know, you find some circular way to somehow justify state projects. So, that's my impression. But I'm still open to it. I mean, I'm not like actively trying. I think I had Bob Murphy lined up for the longest time for Tolstoy, and I kind of just like I'd been emailing him back and forth. I kind of just dropped the ball on that. I probably could really get that going anytime I want. I just haven't got around to it. I don't know. I just always have like a million things going on. A million.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is just an ADD project. I'm sure I will at some point get back to it, but it is just like a kind of when I feel inspired. So yeah, I don't know. And I guess, yeah, if I see like an opening at some point in my schedule where I'm just like kind of uninspired and also like, oh, I have an error, because like I also want to take the time to like read the stuff again before I get into it. And I gotta like set it up. But yeah, no, I definitely want to get back into that at some point. But it's definitely not like a priority or anything. But it's also not a priority. It's more of an unthinking thing. Like how I schedule my shows, it is just really like, I don't know, I want to learn about Sandy Hook, so let's do that. And then I don't know, I'm just kind of following wherever my whims, take me. So
Yeah, the thing about ANCOMs is like there are ones that are influenced by Marx and they attain vulgar takes in the same way that there are ANCAPs who read Hoppe and then acquire vulgar takes as well. And that can almost be like, they're justifying things that are just horrendous, or even things that maybe like the average person necessarily wouldn't be against, but are still really bad when it comes to like, actually if you're a libertarian or an anarchist. For example, I think Into the Agora, he was telling me like he got kicked out of a server. Well, first of all, because he's friends with me, but also because he said that the U.S. shouldn't have been involved in World War II, and so basically he said that was wrong, and so they kicked him out of that server, and it was like a commie, like ANCOM. I think it was ANCOMs. I don't think it was like Marxist or anything. Probably just leftist in general. I'm not sure. He could probably give way more takes as far as what he's heard in his time of like interacting with people online, as far as like vulgar takes.
yeah, and with the ANCOMs and socks, for some reason, I'm sure he's probably encountered this like in Agora spaces, because for some reason, I don't know what it is. I think my theory is because Konkin described Agorism as a left libertarianism thing. I think it is then just naturally kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it naturally, attracts the ANSOC, ANCOM types into that haven't really read it. A lot of people, I guess I say this, I know you know this, but for the audience, like he said left libertarianism, but he didn't mean it in the colloquial sense. He meant it he was conceptualizing left and right as in working with state power. So in this framework, he considered Rothbard at the time, because I think Rothbard was on his right kick at that point, working with all the right groups. He was characterizing him as a right libertarian in the sense that he was wanting to advance his ideas by working within the political system, and he identified left libertarianism as working outside of it. So that's a distinction. But then a lot of people take that and they think of left libertarianism, which is colloquially speaking today just kind of this ethereal, I like lefty bullshit, but I'm a libertarian, which you can be. You can like lefty bullshit and be a libertarian, but it's just kind of this amorphous term, like for like in modern, libertarianism.
I mean, the accurate descriptors for what he intended to say, or what he meant when he said those things were like, reactionary, meaning like right meaning reactionary, and left meaning revolutionary. And essentially that would, because he even compared it to like the French Revolution, right? So the thing with that being is that like essentially, working outside the state, that's revolutionary, that's taking action into your own hands. On the right side, that would be like, depending on the organization that is in place to do your bidding somehow for you. But yeah, let's see. We got Into the Agora here saying it was an ANCOM, like in quotes, server, and I got banned for a variety of reasons, but all of them ridiculous. They tried calling Rothbard and Mises fascists. Oh yeah, they did that.
To be fair,
too.
they are, if you don't know what the term means. So
yeah, well, everybody's a fascist, right? Lots of ANCOMs are actually really based, though, and don't support status welfare or World War II. Yes, that is actually true. And that was something I was going to say. Like, there will be people that are inspired by like Kropotkin or Bakunin that are, not vulgar ANCOMs. Like they're just actually consistently like, voluntarist, I guess, in the sense is probably the best word for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have found too, like, especially reading the Anarchist Handbook, a lot of these like left anarchists, especially like the like the older variety, like they're like founding fathers, the ones that you read in the book. A lot of them, like, don't get me wrong, like if you get down to the roots of it, their economics are usually a little bit wonky, maybe a little bit misguided. But a lot of times they're kind of explaining a lot of the same things that a lot of ours were. I want to say maybe it was Bakunin or maybe it was Kropotkin. I can't remember which one. Okay, he gets into straight up like I forget if it's reparations or what. He gets into like some straight up stuff that I just straight up disagree with. socializing like the money or something. I forget the specifics of it in there. And I'm like, okay, I can't even find a way to like kind of kumbaya with that. But yeah, a lot of them, they really do like what Tucker, like if you realize his stuff, it really does sound a lot. I mean, their labor theory of value was wonky,
Yeah.
but like they essentially ended up at the right conclusion, starting from the wrong starting point with their with their economic theory, because they're like, well, if we accept this, and you're like, well, and then we have the option of doing this through the state or not in the state. Like, what is going to happen? Like, they're going to take all of our labor, and then we're just going to be slaves or whatever. And so they end up with the right conclusion. But yeah, I'm kind of talking in circles. But my point being is that there is sometimes a lot more crossover than we want to admit. But although there are some, that's not the case.
And I mean, the thing to highlight here being that they were a lot more consistent when it came to what counts as an ethical claim. And basically like their ideas of property, despite, ANCAP's probably saying, oh, well, they didn't like private property. What they were really talking about was the state's legal title that is associated with private property, because essentially the concept of like private and public are state like distinctions for what property even is. And essentially like they were just against the idea of defining property as this unilateral thing, and rather actually having like, justified claims be the source of, who owns what. And, with that, they were against things like land titles, because they saw it as like, well, it's not really like somebody can own these like massive acres of land, because they're not really demonstrating that they own it. It's really just that they get some sort of like, decree that says that they do. So let's see, we got
that brings up a good point. I guess I probably should have brought this up with Konkin earlier. Kind of like these defining terms things. Konkin defined himself as anti-capitalist, which a lot of people take umbrage to today, and that's why they kind of a lot of times fit him in with like the left libertarians of today, because for one, he claimed to be, and then also said he was anti-capitalist, but he was defining that as state capitalism, which is still the common crux that we deal with so many discussions between capitalists and socialists, is so many times they'll just talk past each other in terms where like, okay, and the old socialists knew this. They did, or communists or whatever. They would usually define in terms of state communism or like social communism or anarcho communism or whatever. But the idea being is that like, yes, and that's the same thing Konkin was doing. He was defining capitalism and using it in the way it was originally defined, as meaning state capitalism, because that's kind of how it came about. Is it was almost like a term they were using to snub their noses at the barons of the time, the people that we wouldn't really consider to be the moneylender types, the Rothschilds, those type of people. So that was what was used to snub their nose at them, which those people had a legitimate complaint. This was like came up during that period of time where we had a lot of left anarchist uprisings as a result of these like I forget what the terms they use, what robber barons or whatever the hell. But those people were heavily state connected and were using their state connections to allow themselves to do awful things to these people. They wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for their government connections.
Yeah, so we got into the Agora saying most of the problems with left anarchists can be traced back to their lack of Austrianism, which I completely agree. Yeah. And yeah, the thing with capitalism as well, it's like, what Konkin was defining it as is an economic system. And, essentially, what we're talking about here, and yes, there are ANCAPs, like, they're for the most part defining capitalism. Sometimes they do it both ways. Like they'll say like, okay, capitalism is what we have now, but capitalism is also the free market. There's not really a disagreement there. Like there is no disagreement there when it comes to the free market aspect of it. Like, well, not really saying like this is capitalism, but saying like, yes, this is the goal of libertarians and what sort of society that they actually want to achieve. And I mean, if you look at what agorism even is, I mean, it's turning everything into black market activity, essentially, like, without the state looking over it. Let's see, we have real quick Into the Agora also saying even ANCOMs like thought you could have personal property, right? So any ANCOM, quote unquote, who thinks you can't actually own anything, they don't know what they're talking about. And yeah, that distinction as well. What those anarchists that we're talking about, like the classic ones, would mean with personal property is that essentially like they're not coming up with this Marxist bullshit of like, oh, well, like owning a building is actually like private property and that's wrong. And therefore, but this camera that I have right here is personal property. Well, no, I mean, if it's a justified homestead, if it's like a justified claim, it is your personal property. It's just, the private property comes with the state saying you are backed by legal decree. This is yours. The cops will enforce this for you.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And so yeah, I do think a lot of times we're kind of talking past each other. I mean, I will say, typically speaking, yes. I mean, if someone's using the kind of language, the coded language you would hear of the left. Yeah, I mean, there are probably some socialist comment like, but I mean, you never know. I mean, this is why defining terms is important. A lot of times, like, when you see have these capitalism, socialism arguments, you're talking completely past each other with your definitions, and you're kind of with these ANCOM and SOX. A lot of times, you kind of can come to some sort of agreement. I mean, we could get into a deeper discussion of when it comes to like culture, if like, yeah, maybe you might not want to group up with them. Which is why, like, I think things like agorism are great, because yeah, you can still do trade with these people, but like in a Hoppian sense, you can still group to your things. If you really don't like Muslims or whatever, you can live in your area full of white people or whatever. Give an example. I don't even care. I'm not even trying to like single them out. But you can still trade with those other individuals. Like, there's no reason you can't do that. I forgot. I was kind of rambling. I forgot my point. I had a point I was getting to.
Okay. So let's see. Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask like about this, like, series in general that you've done. I was kind of wondering like what is the favorite one that you've worked on? It could be, I assume it's a parapolitics one at this point, just where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, my OKC series is
Right.
like definitely huge. I mean, that was for those just now here, like hearing about this. Like, I just kind of decided I wanted to cover Oklahoma City bombing, and like, I think I don't know if maybe I'd done any series at that point or not. I've definitely become more like with series heavy show. I don't remember but initially I think I was just thinking it was just gonna be one episode. And as I was talking to Richard Booth, who was the guest I got, he is essentially, I consider him like crypt keeper of the Oklahoma City Archive on the Libertarian Institute, which is the largest public archive of Oklahoma City relating documents, articles, etc. And I got him on the show, and like, so he knows this stuff like back and forth, and we just did like a comprehensive breakdown. What was it, 7 8 parts altogether? I think I had a bonus episode with Ken Silva, who's a journalist who's covered a lot of stuff related to this. And yeah, we just kind of like broke down every little aspect of it, different characters, whatever. I think it turned out great, and it's still like to this day still I actually have some stuff coming soon. I'm not saying what. It should be dropping, I guess within a week or so, hopefully, maybe a little bit more. I have some big stuff, more Oklahoma City stuff going on, but I don't know, that's been really rewarding for me, digging into that, kind of learning more about that, becoming, I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I'm becoming much more knowledgeable. So I can, now I have this base of things that I can go on and talk to people about this. And, but yeah, no, it's been really rewarding, and it's been really cool. I've been able to like, I think in some ways I have contributed to bringing, Oklahoma City bombing back into the public psyche somewhat. I mean, I'm not trying to like say too much,
Yeah.
but like that I have, but like I think I've shook up some dust, made some movements for that, and I think it's cool, especially because I think Oklahoma City bombing's that one of those things that's like right at that a period of time to where I think we might be getting close to like some sort of mass disclosure or turning point in like the public psyche when it comes to it, because it's so rife for that right now, because so much of the information is there, and once you just get it to the right eyes and they start to like click things, they're just like, it's so damning. Like, at the very least, the Oklahoma City bombing was a cover up, and it seems very likely. I mean, not even. Actually, it's not even a matter of very likely. Like, there was Fed infiltration in these groups that did end up like being associated with this. So I think at the very least you have to make some sort of case that it was a sting gone wrong or something along those lines. I mean, the cover up is like absolute. Like, if you look at the
Yeah.
facts, like, it's very clear there was a cover up that happened. But now, like, they essentially let it happen, even if it was accidentally, like, say some sort of sting gone wrong. That's almost certain to me as well. And then there's also the element of like, when you really dig deep into it, it's like, it's not that crazy of an idea that maybe to some extent some entity may have, shadowy entity may have made this happen. But the official narrative we still have to this day is that it was just Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, which is a little bit of support from Terry Nichols. Basically, just the way they characterize it's always basically just McVeigh, and he drove up and boom, blew the place up. Meanwhile, there was over 20 eyewitnesses that saw Timothy McVeigh with another person, on the day of, before and after the bombing. And, whoop, we dropped that. There was like the biggest manhunt for John Doe 2 within the few months after, and they just dropped it. Like, so I don't know. I think like it doesn't take much for people to realize like, what the hell? But for some reason, they cemented it in the psyche at the time as, oh, just the one guy. But now I think with it, there's the information out there to where it really, there can be kind of like a changing of the public psyche for that one. So I know I've been really happy doing that one. I think it's been pretty rewarding.
That's good. And, I mean, it definitely seems like you actually did contribute a lot to bringing it back, just because like you mentioned on Tim Pool's show when you went on there, and he has a big following. You even wore the shirt and you were talking about it, right? How was that actually going on Tim Pool's show?
It was cool. I mean, I don't really know how to like, I mean, you just show up, they put you up in a hotel, and then they essentially have a driver drives around. You're just kind of alone at the hotel. The first time I went with Reed, so I had Reed with me, Reed Coverdale.
Right.
But second time I went alone. But yeah, you're at the hotel, you're stuck there. Depending if you get there the day of or the day before, you're just stuck there until it's time for the show, and then like usually like a couple hours prior. So you'll because the show's like 8, so you usually get there about, I don't know, 5 to 6, probably closer to 6. You'll kind of just be in the downstairs area hanging out with people, some of the cast. I mean, both times, like, it wasn't like any of it wasn't like Tim like really hung out like down there a lot, and I get it, it's a daily show. It's weird to mix it up like that every single day. But yeah, and then like an hour prior, like at 7, you go up to the room, kind of get situated. He just kind of briefly kind of goes through, oh, yep, this is this thing. We might talk about that. That way you're just primed. But it's a clusterfuck, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's interesting going for a current event show, because it really is such a gamble of what you're gonna get, and like especially because I'm not a current events commentator. I can but I'm not like someone who pays attention to the minutia of like the current events. Like I'm focused on friggin', I don't know, like the Oklahoma City bombing and stuff like that. So like it is a matter of like, can I take these and flip them to talk about my thing? I don't know. I mean, it is really one of the great things about being an ANCAP though, is I have that background of like theory to where it's like I can be thrown a given current events thing and generally kind of get an approximate right take on it, just because I have a good backup of theory.
Yeah.
I just go, okay, well, X, Y, Z, and then yep, no, that's bad. Nope, that's not good. So, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it. I mean, I'm definitely really grateful. Cassandra McDonald's really cool. She's a booker, and I love a lot of the people there. I've made a lot of good connections over there especially with like the journalists and some of the the people working there. I think it's a really cool operation they got going there for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, I definitely have seen takes of Tim where I'm like, God damn it, dude. Yeah. But like he's a nice guy. I've interacted with him a little bit. I mean, we're not like, because people have this idea, I think they're like, oh, you on so and so's podcast or whatever, and you're like, you must be buddies. I'm like, I met him like twice. And it was like while we were podcasting. So it's like, I don't know. I don't have really any strong opinions. Seemed like a nice enough guy. Seemed like a really smart guy. Really like, business wise, kind of smart in that way. Obviously, I think some of his political theories a little wonky, but whatever. But I don't really have many like beef, or anything. I definitely, it was an entertaining time. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say to it. It was fun. It's kind of a nightmare when you get done and your social media is just like you can't even keep up.
Yeah. But yeah, it's good you're not too consumed with current events, just because like, I mean, if you're doing that all day, every day, I could just imagine like the mental turmoil that you're going through, just having that happen to you, like all day, every day, you're just focused on what's on the news. And I mean, I know Tim's like, he's reading it for the people that he's doing the show for, but it's like, I don't know. You have to have some sort of mental fortitude to just not go insane.
Yeah, I guess so. I just like, I find it to some extent, I guess, generally focusing on the minutia of current events. Most of it time is just like nonsense. So it's like, I mean, I guess some of the stuff is like, you just pay attention to the big stuff here and there. But generally speaking, I don't know. I'm sure maybe I'll go through a period where I do. It really is, I just kind of go where the wind flows with my interests. Like for example, I guess I got a little bit more interested in current events with the Israel-Palestine stuff going on. I read up a little bit more to get more learned on it, but generally speaking, yeah, like I don't know, current events don't typically. But like I said, I mean, it really is just a matter of, I can't even define it, I guess, is where my egoism comes in. I'm just following what interests me. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, the point I'm kind of also making with that is like, when the media is coming up with its cycles and the state's essentially trying to push new like things, like, the current thing, as many would call it, it's essentially just to get people like continually distracted, as opposed to like actually working on themselves, doing things that they care about, looking at things that they care about. It's essentially just trying to rope people in, politicize them further, honestly, because like, let's say like with the RNC debates, for example, like I watched the first one just because my friend's like, oh, let's watch it. I was really bored and I'm like, I don't want to watch any more of this. I see people going nuts over what Vivek's saying and like to what's her name, like Nikki Haley or whatever. Is that is that
Nikki
who he's
Haley,
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, right. But anyway, I do not care. Like it's like,
Yeah, I
wow,
don't care.
he's roasting her.
No, I didn't watch any of that shit.
Yeah.
And like even so far as like commenting on current events, it's not that hard. Say with that, like say for example with the RNC debates, like say I knew I was going on Tim Pool like tomorrow or whatever, I would just like kind of scroll Twitter for a while and just kind of see a bunch of different takes on the stuff and just kind of be like, yeah, okay, cool. These are the highlights because it's all you're gonna do anyways. It's like not that hard. Like current events is at the end of the day is pretty, I guess, somewhat simple. I guess being good at like staying abreast of all of them is a little bit hard, but at the end of the day, like having a good backbone of theory. And I think like the parapolitics has helped me a lot too, because like it really helps you conceptualize the travesty that is the government. Because I feel like it's like ANCAPs, we like logic ourselves to a way where we understand like, oh, this is perverse incentives, and this is a overall an immoral or unproductive entity that exists, and like it like detracts from society. But and you understand like what those things mean, but like once you see like isolated examples and like a like of like, oh yeah, they did this, or like say I don't know, Operation Gladio over like the UN, like you're like, oh Jesus Christ, they were just like murdering people and blaming it on other groups. You're like, once you start seeing that stuff, that's when you're like, oh, those perverse incentives. Okay, that's what that creates. Like, they're conceptually evil. No, they are literally evil. Like, so it's like, and I guess not only like all of them. Obviously, this is like a, as I said, it's an incentives thing. So these things over time become these things that they are. Just these nasty people clamoring for power and willing to do depraved things for it. And then they find ways to, present it in a way that like they're upholding the national interests or whatever.
Yeah. So I would say like the most evil people, or that you could at least identify as the most evil people, are those that are aware of what they're orchestrating, for the fact being that like they need to know what they're orchestrating in order to orchestrate it. Like feds, for example, not every single fed, but a lot of them, or at least the higher up ones, would be a great example of that. Maybe most presidents, I don't know, maybe Trump definitely, or maybe Trump actually believes what he's saying, but like just people like, in more like, positions of power that like know what they have to do or know what they have to say. I would identify as those sorts of people. Now, look, I really like, I was going to say something earlier, like a joke, but I had to let it off. I know we were getting into this more serious discussion of like government, but look, I can summarize the Vivek versus Nikki Haley debate in like a few words. So it goes, you are the fucking, no, you are the fucking, fuck you bloody.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know for Tim's show.
A lot of good Indian jokes. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's I don't know. I guess Vivek's interesting character, but the other day I'm just like overall just uninterested in a lot of that stuff. I guess like I do like, paying attention to the broad aspects of what's going on, like what these things may mean. Like, like say all the RFK stuff and like what happened with him and how he just fell apart and is like cucked for Israel now. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to say.
So somebody was asking me about this. I don't even know. I don't like follow it. Is RFK, I know he ran as like independent, or is he still running?
I think he's still running, which is bizarre to me. I don't really like I think he undercut any like sort of like legitimate grassroots support with his Israel stuff personally, because I think anyone who's like principled, who really was interested in him, that was a strong signal to them, like, oh, he's not everything he's saying he is. But yeah, no, I'm pretty sure he's still running. So I don't really know what that means for the future with him. And he is, to be fair, there is still, even with that, there's a mixed bag, because like you can make the political calculation that like he's like, yo, I'm already rocking the hardcore. And like that is kind of the third rail. I think it's becoming less of it, is any sort of opposition to Israel. It's becoming less of it, I think, with people speaking out, more against it. But I mean, you could totally say he made a political calculation that like, hey, I'm already talking about the vaxes. I'm already like talking about, I mean, just my existence here kind of implies, MK Ultra, government assassinations. Like if anyone knows the story of his father and Sirhan, and then even just his uncle JFK. So just even his existence in the public like consciousness as a candidate is a lot. But like I don't know, what does that mean that now he's like kind of Israel cook? I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing with that is like I've pretty much made like enough podcasts, I guess, to be considered like a mini series of things about like these anti-establishment candidates and these people that claim like, oh, look, I'm here to fix the system, or I'm here to root out all the, like the evil and get rid of the bureaucracy and fix things for you and represent you. Like it's really just coming down to the fact that like I think more of these are popping up because it's almost like the state is willing to accept this at this time, just because people are losing faith in the state as an institution. And it's about time that like, there are people that come in that can say, oh, I will represent you, so that people feel enfranchised again, so that they don't feel disenfranchised, so that they will vote, so that they will like take more control over, not take more control over it, so that they will engage more in political action and think they have more control over what the government is or isn't doing, and feel like, finally like we're winning.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, if we are to, let's say he is cucked to Israel, and let's say it's like the most friendly way possible, he's just like a political calculation. It's like, I feel like that is a subtle give to show like where he will fall later. So let's say he's everything else he says he is. He's great on like vaccine stuff. He's openly out and about how awful of an institution the CIA is. But if he is cucked for Israel, like if anyone has a proper understanding of like foreign policy, and he claims to be against foreign, like the forever wars, if you understand foreign policy, a lot of this comes from like the incentives of continuing to prop up the Israeli government. Like it was part of its like when it came about. I forget the specific source. I think it was some individual from America. Like the what it would take to create the state and uphold it would be like the blood of like tons of people. And like, so it's been known from the beginning that this this project that they have going on here is taking, like, we have to deal with it when it comes to our foreign policy. Like a lot of our stuff over there is about working with people who are amenable to us and toppling people who aren't, and keeping certain primary players in the positions they are in, so they can be our kind of like our proxies in the area, like places like Saudi Arabia and Israel being probably the two most primary ones. And then all the other little ones they play like Game of Thrones nonsense with to let them kind of, thrive and be our business partners.
Yeah. So we have Zach saying also Israel was an experiment zone for Pfizer, which
For real.
I don't know how much I could say that stuff on the show, but there we go. We said it. Yeah, the thing is with Israel is like a lot of people want it to seem like, okay, well, Israel is like the root source of everything. Like that is the thing causing all these things. But I see it more as like, okay, America has, and other nations have the interest in establishing this state, and then to essentially uphold the state, yes, they do need to like essentially go to all these wars, or at least like, yeah, go through all the wars like in the Middle East and all that, and make sure that Israel has domain over its area, its geographical boundaries. But it's more so like they're trying to get politicians to accept Israel as valid, so that the politicians will act in the interests of Israel, or at least like promote that to their voters as well, rather than like, oh, well, it's just Israel controlling America and the politicians. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I agree with you.
Yeah, because I mean, like some people want it to seem like, oh, well, that's everything. Like that is the nexus of like what exactly the problem is, and it's like, well, no, it's still states, and it's still manipulation, and it's still, this is just part of the scheme. Like, yeah, so it's not really
Israel
the ultimate
is
enemy.
a big player, but I do think a lot of people do get swept up in that, and oh, it's all the Jews, it's all Israel. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong, it's fun to like giggle about and joke around, but at the end of the day, like it is like it's a state thing. I will say that like there is to some extent that the Jew identity has been like incorporated into upholding the state in certain senses, as has been weaponized with some place like Israel, because it creates this like tacit like you must support this or you're bad. But it's like, but what are we supporting? You're supporting a state. Yeah. Like, why?
I mean, literally via Zionism.
Yeah. So it's just it's like this weird mind fuck they play with you to get you to support it. And why? Just because this one state was founded on not being mean to Jews? Like, I'm sorry, I'm a grown up. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. So I guess like you already kind of discussed it, like your process for making videos, but I was wondering if there was anything else you wanted to add, especially with the parapolitics stuff, as far as just like your preparation for these sorts of things and the research you do, if there's anything you find interesting in your process.
Well, I hesitate to call a lot of anything that I do research. I guess technically it is, but generally speaking, say when it comes to any series, say Trying to think of another one besides like the RFK one. I got Lisa Pease, who wrote a book on it. I got her, and we did, I think, something like 6. We may do more in the future. And we covered the RFK assassination. So I found an expert and I talked to him. And like while we're going through the series, I will like kind of while I'm working, like because I mean I am a manual laborer, I will like listen to podcasts and stuff. So it'll be like, or I might listen to an audiobook or whatever. I mean, depending on the topic, I might read an article or two here and there. But generally speaking, I just kind of get myself like sort of primed for it. And then I have an expert and then I just kind of listen to what they have to say. And I can develop my understanding as I go. Now, with like certain things that I get more invested with, like the Oklahoma City bombing, I've like gone out of my way to like contact individuals that were actually involved and stuff. Like I got Stephen Vassar, who was a friend of Terrence Hickey, and he was also a John Doe 2 eyewitness. So I got him on my show and I interviewed him. So like, I guess you could call that research. Like, and I did write a paper on it. So like, but the other day, like, it's usually just stuff like I've enunciated, or I've said multiple times, just kind of like, stuff that I'm just generally interested in. So I just kind of spurg on and just like kind of like spiral down into it. But that I don't really do like any sort of massive, I almost never do solo episodes. So, I mean, obviously when I do, there's a little bit more preparation go into that. But generally speaking, there's not a lot of preparation really needs to be done, especially once you've done, podcasts. Like, I think I'm like damn near almost near 300. I mean, obviously I've done appearances on other shows. So I've done over 300 podcasts. So you kind of get the idea. Like, I mean, I usually will make like a loose outline of like a few things I definitely want to hit. And, but the other day it's really not that hard when you have a guest, especially if you have an expert. It's super easy to ask probing questions. I mean, it's really more of just like getting a confidence thing of doing it a bunch, when it comes to like public speaking, stuff like that. But yeah, so far, like, don't get me wrong though, solo episodes, takes a little bit more skill to do that. But so far as like interview shows, not too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, usually if I'm bringing somebody on, like you, for example, I was just like watching through your content again, like refreshing myself on points that I'm like, okay, well, this is probably stuff I actually want to ask them about, just so, that there's some sort of insights other than just like, oh, well, what do you think of this? And it's like, you've already probably said that like 10 times. Like, I don't want to be doing that sort of thing. I kind of want to be building on what you've already talked about, but yeah, I think, like we've had a great episode here. Now, I still want to ask you one more question before we start the wrap up. But yeah, no, I mean, like so far, really appreciate it for coming on. It's been going well. I actually really enjoyed this episode, but most important question, right? Possibly, what's your workout routine?
My workout routine?
Yeah, what's your workout routine?
Oh, dude, honestly, it's been awful lately. Since I got out of like active duty military, like I have just been like actually having to like contribute to society and actually work more. So yeah, no, that's been I've had a lot less a lot less time for that. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know how to give that to you.
Yeah.
When I do work out, I don't know. I have different splits. I have a chest day, I have a leg day, I have a back day, I have a shoulder day, I have an arm day. And I do a different thing every time. I mean, it depends on what I'm going for. Yeah. If I was at the gym right now, like, I don't know, say I was doing chest day, I'd really probably just do like 4 sets of, 40 push-ups and then do some flies, maybe go for a run. It's just kind of simple. I mean, I'm not like, what I used to be. I mean, back in the day, I was squatting 625, benching like 355, but I was like 220, like fucking meat cake, 5'5". So, yeah, I'm not that now. I've definitely put enough stress in my body. When I do work out more, it's more like maintaining. So, yeah. I don't really ever get like above like 3-4 plates on like say like squat. Like if I'm doing squats, I might do like 4 sets of 10 or 12 with 225 or something.
Yeah. Were you taken aback by that question? Because you asked after I said it, you like repeated it.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, I don't even know how to answer that one. Because I mean, we could probably do another 20-30 minutes on like my different thoughts on what routines you should do depending on what you're doing and the different ones I've done at different times.
Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah. No, but one day, maybe I'll be a full-time podcaster and all I do is read and work out. And yes, then I will have a solid routine to lay out for you.
Yeah. Well, you guys talked about how like Tower Gang was your thing that you think that's the formula that's going to blow up, right?
I mean, yeah, I guess somewhat. I think I've said before, and maybe on the show, I think it's like synergistic, and it's in the fact that we're all kind of doing our own things. We all kind of come together. I also think it's good for all of us because most of us are on separate serious shows to kind of have a goofy show to kind of let off the steam. I think it kind of, and I think it's, I don't know, I think it's just all around good. I just enjoy it. I just get a once a week, go hang out with my buddies, shoot the shit, say naughty words. But yeah, no, I think that will be kind of it kind of makes us a little team. And I like it. It's kind of the tie that binds us all, and I think it makes us like it makes us a good little team.
All right. Yeah. So I do want to give you some time just in case there's anything you want as far as final thoughts on the episode or the discussion we had, and maybe any other thoughts you have. And if there's anything you want to shout out as well, because I know we've talked about what you do, but if there's anything specifically, you can go ahead and do that.
Oh, no, nothing specifically. I don't really have any final thoughts. I mean, I guess I just give my plugs real quick.
Sure.
But yeah, people like I have the No Way Jose show that like as I said, I've had a lot of theory on there if that's your interest. I have a lot of different playlists you can go check out. I've done a lot of live reading, so I have like pretty much all of the main works of Konkin. I've done live readings on. So if you want to if you're interested in agorism, I'm still have an ongoing Democracy of the God That Fails, because that's a long book and we're like something ridiculous, like over 20 parts at this point. But if you like the idea of us reading to you so you don't have to, and getting some commentary along the way, that might interest you. But I've also gone really into parapolitics, as you said. I've stuff like the Columbine shootings, JFK, RFK, OKC being my big boy. Yeah, so I mean, if that's stuff that interests you, I highly recommend you go check it out. I have some new stuff coming, the OKC stuff, probably fairly groundbreaking here soon. Being tight-lipped on that, but pay attention. And yeah, if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose.
Yeah.
Thanks
so,
oh
yeah, no, of course. I'm going to shout out my stuff real quick too, because I honestly, I should have done more of it at the beginning of the show, but I kind of it slipped past me. We're having such a good conversation there. But yeah, ahmedmlih.com, sign up for my email list, get the latest updates. Civil Offense, we are streaming on Rumble as well right now, as well as YouTube. I do like just a Rumble stream every time, same as there. Streaming services like podcast services, I upload next day at the latest. So that should be there. Amazon, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen, should be there. If you want to check out the Civil Offense Discord server, pretty much just you need to DM me at anarchonitrane, because I don't have like a public Discord link, but yeah, I'll get back to you on that. And yeah, as you can see in the top right corner, I am kind of poor right now because the StreamYard logo's there. Yeah, I had a subscription before, but that's kind of out. So if you like, you can go to my website, contribute there. Also on Rumble, like, cause I am such a small channel on YouTube that the super chats thing isn't a thing, but for future reference, Rumble actually does let you do it just from the beginning. Like, you can get monetized immediately. I don't know if you stream on Rumble, Jose, but like, yeah. I've gotten a chat on there before. It's pretty good. So yeah. Yeah,
Ben
anything
monetized on YouTube and Ben demonetized. So yeah, that
I saw you talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw you talking about that on the Austin Peterson, Dave Smith stream. So what was that about? Like, what happened there?
Oh, I voiced, it wasn't even like strong support, but I did an episode where at one point we talked about like kind of Civil War stuff, and I said something along the lines of like, maybe it's not as simple as Booth was the villain, and and Lincoln was the angel or whatever, and then I made some comment too about like I said something along the lines of like, and I'm a little bit even kind of amenable to the position of the South. Like, I don't like, obviously I don't agree with slavery or whatever, but like, I think that they were fully within their rights to secede. They should be able to do that. Secession should be something that theoretically government should be able to, if they're going to, they should be able to break up, voluntary disassociation or whatever. And yeah, it said it was supporting violent gangs or whatever, which for me, like the anarchist in me, it was like, I thought like supporting a violent group is what they called it, or something along those lines. For me, that was hilarious, because you're like, the implications of that. Like, this was a two factions in a war. So like, what, in any war situation, like, I can't make any. Am I not allowed to make any pronouncements of supporting either side? Like, I guess if we apply that uniformly, I'm okay with that. But but no, it was silly. So I got demonetized for that. Got a strike, but yeah, whatever. I don't know. Not the biggest deal. It wasn't like I was getting a ton from super chats, but it still sucked.
Well, you just have to start saying how much you support Israel, and then I think they'll give it back to you.
Yeah, I think
honestly.
So.
Yeah,
I think if I do enough. But yeah, definitely, I'm on Rumble, so definitely people check me out there, because yeah, I mean they do the super chats, and yeah, I don't put all my content on YouTube because of the fact that I've gotten so many strikes, and I know how you got to play the game. So.
Yep. Well, again, appreciate you coming on. I pretty much shouted out everything I have. If that's it for you, yeah. I again, great episode. Would love to have you back on with Ignis, like I mentioned before. Sure, he's a good guy, has good conversations as well. Has somewhat different opinions on agorism and all that than I do. Like you saw with his question there. We do have like a back and forth kind of thing, which I find entertaining. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So remember, guys, that civil offense is the key to winning.